Hey again, and welcome back to another nightly prelude for the Metropolitan Opera HD stream. I'm Carol Anderson, the principal coach of Utah Opera, and I am your host for these little introductions. Tonight we're talking about Charles Gounod's opera Romeo and Juliet. It's an opera that's very close to my heart. It's the first opera I performed with or worked on professionally when I was in the Houston Grand Opera Studio. It was the inaugural production of the season that I started and got to work on it and really loved delving into my first professional experience. So Charles Gounod was born in 1815 to an artistic father who was a painter and a practical mother. His mother actually only allowed him to have piano lessons under protest because she was aware of the challenges of trying to make a living as an artist. His painter father was a winner of the Prix de Rome. I've talked about that before. That was a very important fellowship for French artists that carried with it prestige and also the chance to go to Rome and study. Gounod took this as a legacy, and he actually won the Prix de Rome himself for liturgical work later on. Charles Gounod came to opera relatively late in his life, composing the first of his 12 operas at the age of 38. Only two of these operas remain commonly performed today, and those are Faust and Romeo and Juliet. The story of Romeo and Juliet, as told by various authors, was the inspiration for numerous operatic settings. There are at least 25 composed operas on the subject of these tragic lovers, including the very earliest by Schwaneberger in 1776, ending with a marriage, and Siebert's 1793 setting, which also has a happy ending. I discovered in my research that the Romeo and Juliet story actually originated back in the 1400s and was not original to William Shakespeare. He stole the story from existing materials for his 1596 masterpiece. Today, probably only 5 musical works based on the Shakespeare play hold a regular position in the classical music realm. Prokofiev's ballet setting, Bernstein's musical theater piece West Side Story, Berlioz's dramatic symphony, Tchaikovsky's Overture to Romeo and Juliet, and the only true opera, which is Gounod's 1867 setting. Gounod achieved great success as the first truly French voice in opera with the 1859 premiere of Faust, but he had subsequently been trapped in a cycle of failure for the following 6 years. He was even accused of the most horrific of sins for a Frenchman, that of being a Wagnerite. After his 1862 opera, The Queen of Sheba, was unjustly compared to the disastrous French premiere of Tannhäuser. He retreated from Paris and all the stress thereof to the peaceful countryside of Provence, where he turned his attention to the story of Romeo and Juliet. He was already familiar with the Bellini opera, The Capulets and the Montagues, which is actually based on an Italian play. However, he was profoundly influenced upon hearing a performance of Berlioz's Romeo and Juliet dramatic symphony at the age of 19. After hearing that rehearsal, the young composer was able to recall from memory passages of this as yet unpublished work. He played them several weeks later for Berlioz. Berlioz demanded brusquely, "How did you get a hold of this?" And Gounod replied calmly, "At your rehearsal." So he was pretty amazing with his ability to recall and play by ear. This experience stuck with him for years and led him to begin this project as a mature man in his 50s. In a letter to his wife Anna, Gounod said writing Romeo made him feel 20 again. Gounod called once more upon his team of Jules Barbier and Michel Carré, who created the libretto for Faust, to adapt the Shakespeare play for an operatic setting. They, as much as anyone who ever did a version of Romeo and Juliet, remained true to the original material, while making numerous changes to transform this complex drama for the stage. It takes longer to sing things than it does to say, so there needed to be certain cuts and trims made for time. The main features of the plot remain intact, and as well as large portions of text and imagery, things that were even almost just literally translated from English into French. They had to cut some of the comedic bits of the opera for time, and of course they did a little bit of extra stuff to allow For more poignant duets, for instance, they allowed Juliet to wake up before Romeo died so that there was a wonderful opportunity for a love duet at the end of the opera. Some of the pieces that most closely resemble the Shakespeare in the libretto are the Prologue, which goes along with that sonnet that begins every Shakespeare play. And in this case, it's two households, but like in dignity and fair Verona, where we lay our scene. The opening French is Verona, vit jamais jadis deux familles rivales, which is Verona, which had seen always two rival families, les Montaigu, les Capulet, obviously, de la guerre sans fin, of their war without end, à toutes deux fatale, deadly to both families. Ensanglanter le seuil de ses palais, which is bloodying the soil of the threshold of our palace. Goes on, and it talks about how Romeo and Juliet the story of Romeo and Juliet comes into this dark place. Gounod's style of opera contrasts greatly with the current prevailing styles of opera of the 19th century French opera. We had grand opera, like the pieces of Meyerbeer and Aubert, with its pageantry and always its ballet. And there were also opera comique with spoken dialogue in less pretentious situations, less epic situations. But Gounod is unique in its intimacy in the Romeo and Juliet, in the exploration of in the real sentimental nature of the work. Its music kind of wears its heart on its sleeve, in the words of one writer, especially in its four sentimental and quite melodic vocal duets, love duets. Romeo enjoyed instant success and was quickly produced in many international venues. So the dramatic confrontation of the rival families is set up in the overture. We have a tremolo and low brass, and then we have a dramatic fugue, which of course is an older structural technique. And it kind of goes along with the idea that the Montaigus and Capulets are back in the Renaissance. Low brass. So these dramatic seventh chords, they have that kind of panic sense. And then we have the fugue theme, and I only go through a couple voices because it gets too complex. The orchestra can do individual lines much better than my 10 fingers. Oh, I didn't keep going with the fugue, so I don't have it, but that's the fugue theme. See, it has that sequence that builds each time, so the urgency of the fugue happens, and then we have it in a four-voice fugue. So then the music calms down from this dramatic moment, and then we have almost a funeral march with a trumpet. Then harp. Is really a unique moment because the chorus is a cappella for quite a bit of this, from all of this until like really the last phrase. So it's a cappella, and then we have these harp interjections and then the trumpet later on, and then comme un rayon vermeil. That's talking about when like the sun coming into a darkness, this romance comes along. So one of the great speeches in Romeo and Juliet is the Queen Mab speech, where Mercutio talks about Mab, the queen of the fairies, and how she comes into dreams and controls the dreams that are happening. And it's really a brilliant piece of poetic writing, which the librettists Barbier and Carré have expertly transitioned into French. And the music is, this is one of the few things Mercutio sings, but it's a real showpiece for him because it's just super wordy, it's fleet. Talking about the fleeting nature of dreams, when he talks about there's talking about the different kinds of dreams, like the widow dream, the husband dreams of being a widower, and then the miser dreams of his money. And there are little poetic things in the orchestra that paint the pictures of this. For instance, when the soldier dreams of war, we have the trumpets going. So this is the opening of this. It's not going to sound, it's a lot of winds and it's very flitty, kind of like the music of Midsummer Night's Dream by Felix Mendelssohn, that kind of brilliant wind writing. La reine des mensonges, préside aux anges, plus légère, comme un vent de ses vents. Alors elle passe à travers la nuit, elle passe, elle fuit, elle passe, elle fuit, elle passe, elle fuit. Sous chaque l'entend rapide, entraîne dans l'été limpide, puis fait une noisette vide, pavé de terre, le charron. And it goes on. It's very wordy. It's that way the whole time. It talks about the chariot that's a little nut that is drawn by little insects and things like that. So then we go into the opening of Act 2, and this is coming into the balcony scene. And many of the parts of the balcony scene are directly translated from the Shakespeare into French. Like you can, but soft wet light through yonder window breaks. It is the east and Juliet is the sun. He says, enlève-toi soleil, fais pâlir les étoiles. And that is exactly arise, a star, sun, being Juliet, and make the stars pale, which is the same as arise fair moon and kill the envious. Wait, arise fair sun and kill the envious moon, I think is what it is. So this is the music of the garden. It's very much like the garden scene in Faust. Actually, it's very similar. I think it's even in the same key. Through that whole moment of all these different chords, we have a pedal tone of the F, which kind of keeps it calm and takes the harmony that's a little bit active, but keeps it from being too active, so we get this peaceful moment. So moving on, after Romeo and Juliet have had their secret wedding, which is a fantastic scene with Frère Laurent, the priest, and Gertrude, Juliet's maid, Romeo goes goes gallivanting out into the square, and he's ready to be amenable to all of the Capulets because he's so excited about having gotten married. But he comes into the middle of this fight that starts and has caused some drama that's begun. And it sort of gets started up by Stefano, and he's a made-up character for this opera. Often French operas had these boy characters, trouser roles, somewhat like the roles of Mozart, where a mezzo-soprano female played a young boy. The mezzo-soprano voice sounded similar to the falsetto of a unchanged male voice, and it also sounded similar to the quality of the castrato singers of the Baroque, which is not a thing that we did after a while. So Stefano is this young boy, and he's very, he doesn't really understand the reality of the fugue. He's just kind of excited about, I'm a tough kid and I can do this. It's like anybody's in West Side Story, that tomboy who wants to come in. So we have him singing to Romeo, because Romeo is in the house of the Montagues. He's snuck in to have his wedding night with Juliet. And Stefano says, "Que fais-tu, blanche tourterelle, dans ce nid de vautours?" Which means, what are you doing, white turtle dove, in that nest of vultures? And it's talking about how he is in danger every moment that he spends in the home of the Montagues. Similar to the Mercutio character in that they don't have a lot to do ensemble-wise, but they do both have these very significant arias. So then we will skip on to waking up after their wedding night. Much tragedy has happened actually at this point. Romeo has accidentally Mercutio has been killed by Tybalt, and then Romeo has killed in revenge Tybalt. So a Capulet and a Montague have both died, and Romeo is meant to be exiled, but he sneaks into Juliet's chamber for another romantic love duet. And this is a melody we get to hear earlier, but it comes back in full front, and it actually comes in this last act when they're in the tomb scene in a different key. So we start in D major, which is quite bright. In the tomb scene, it comes back in B flat, has a little bit more of a wistful, warm quality to it. So this is one of their love themes. You want to hear it come back several times. I think it's the last thing. Yes, it's my last excerpt. This is after Juliet takes the potion that produces the likeness of sleep. And we have a beautiful orchestral interlude that is known as Juliet's Slumber. And it's really kind of stunning. And we've had the music when Frere Laurent starts to describe the potion and how it will make her feel, and it will bring her into this lassitude, and then ultimately it will make her seem to be dead. We have that in the music that accompanies him, but then this we have it just in the orchestra all by itself. So it happens several times. It's just a really beautiful, simple moment. simple and short moment, but it's a wonderful moment for the orchestra and often a very useful moment for a set change. So, I think that's what I want to share about Romeo and Juliet. It's one of my favorite operas, and I do think a lot of it is because I love the story. I've known that it was one of the first Shakespeare stories that I got to know, and then it's also one of the first operas I did professionally. It's a challenging one, as so many stories from the history of opera can be challenging in today's times. When we performed it last at Utah Opera, we did a sort of partnership with a suicide prevention group so that we would be clear that we were not glamorizing the ideas of teen suicide. So we have to always see these things through the lens of 2020. So I hope you enjoyed tonight's broadcast. Thanks for joining me once again. Thank you for supporting your local opera company, whomever that may be. We are sorry to be missing you in our halls, but we look forward to welcoming you back into the theaters at the very earliest opportunity. Until then, wash your hands, sanitize, and take care of one another. Thank you.